All right. Actually, if somebody could go outside and get everybody back in their um, yeah, it's just English. But hello, everybody. What do you think so far of the day and the presentations? Informative? Yes? All right, great. So we're going to start with our intersection of AI standards and policy, exploring SMPTE's role. It's going to be co-hosted by me and Andy Maltz. I'm going to introduce Andy. Andy has over 4 decades of experience in instigating, developing, and deploying technologies in the media and entertainment industry, and now leads a media technology consultancy. Andy serves as chair of ISO T36 Cinematography, the motion picture industry's international technical standards body, as a director of the Digital Object Architecture Fostering Donor Foundation, and is on several advisory boards. And he's also frequently invited speaker at industry conferences and guest lecturer in higher education. Andy's previous role included the founding head of staff of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Science and Technology Council, a founding board member of the Academy Software Foundation, founder and CEO of Digital Cinema Pioneer Avika Technology, and co-initiator of the Advanced Authoring Format AAF. Andy co-authored the award-winning The Digital Dilemma research reports on digital preservation, received 2 Engineering Emmy Awards, holds several patents, and is a fellow of the SMPTE of Motion Picture, the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, SMPTE, where he serves on his motion imaging journal board of editors and several engineering committees. Yeah, so quite a bit of education. I'll leave it up to Andy to introduce our panelists and presenters.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. And that was supposed to be the short bio, but thank you for the long bio. Appreciate it. All right, welcome back from lunch, everybody. We're going to try and wake you up and get past the food coma. And I'll introduce our special guests after a couple of introductory remarks. And just wanted to follow up on a comment Thomas made before we broke for lunch. So the morning had some deep dives in some technologies that we don't ordinarily talk about here, just to broaden the perspective a little bit on the AI ecosystem. And this afternoon, we are going to talk about policy and standards, the intersection of them. And as engineers, we might be asking, well, what do we care about policy? Why are we even talking about it? Why are we concerned about it? So aren't standards just for solving interoperability issues or specifying best practices? Well, generally, yes. Except that's not always the case. So there are times where governments and empowered regulatory bodies have a particular point of view on what should be done about something that involves technology, maybe public health effects, safety, or some other policy goal. So if you think about policy as the what do the policymakers want to have happen, and the standards as the how, or how to make it so for what it is that they want.
The graphics in this presentation mostly come from my MacBook, and were created by AI, which is a way in which you can do stuff like this, right? The thing for standards, though, and where it gets interesting for us and for me looking at evaluation, is things like complexity. Usually AI systems is not like one thing, right? And you can clearly kind of say, okay, this is the kind of one component we're dealing with, but usually you deal with a lot of components, and these components are embedded into a number of other systems, and there are interactions between what is going on. So the context really, really matters. So if we take an example here, right, like if you do something for a movie that everyone knows is fictional and that has a kind of production timeline when it gets done, versus something that's broadcast, that's supposed to be live, that is supposed to be real, you have kind of a very different context of how you would kind of deploy your AI system. Then there's this whole question around compliance. how are we in line with what we have to be in line? There was already mentioned all these regulations and rules happening all over the world, and what happens if you apply your product to multiple of those, and how do you kind of deal with that? And then last but not least, how do you get the kind of expertise of actually being able to deal with the results of all these S's and all these C's on this slide, and obviously a lot of other factors that also matters. So looking at NIST and what NIST is kind of trying to do here, NIST is up to a lot, right? So there are a lot of projects going on at NIST regarding AI. There's different spaces and areas NIST is active in. So you might have seen, right, the NIST AI risk management framework. There is a lot happening in ARIA. So this is a socio-technical approach to evaluating AI, and NIST. Part of its role is also to do international standards engagement. So this is something I'm personally helping with, and in particular, the zero drafts. We have one on kind of documentation. So essentially, right, you want to select, let's say, a product. You kind of need to know what kind of goes into there, right? You need provenance, you need authenticity, you need to know how to include it. So that's one thing we're working on. And the other thing we're working on, and that I'm particularly involved in, is, as I was saying, this kind of testing, evaluation, verification, validation space that I'll get to later. Importantly, as we've heard already, NIST does not operate in a vacuum, and we'll get to that too. So with the zero drafts, we're doing something special, and this might be relevant to people here in the room, actually. So we have the two topics on testing, evaluation, verification, validation, and documentation. And we have selected these topics already. Concept papers and concept notes are out, but we're still looking for input. So if you have thoughts, if thoughts are being developed right now or in the conference session later, we would really welcome people to reach out. There is an email address. The URL is at the bottom, right? So you're more than welcome to kind of feed in and help us, because one of the things we don't have, and it's very hard to have, is context about everything and knowing what different stakeholders, different industries need. But as I was saying, right, like NIST is not operating on its own, right? We have so many players in this space that are all relevant. California was already mentioned, right? We, just this week, more, stuff came out regarding like, okay, how do we, have to comply with kind of different laws just here in California? The EU with the AI Act is, one of the early movers on this, as per usual, when it comes to regulation. Since Senelec, EU affiliated standards body, but also IEEE, Insights here in the US, ISO IEC, are working on a variety of standards as well. And then you have players like the kind of World Economic Forum, where they're also trying to do a lot of things in the AI space. So this is difficult, right? Like, you need to be able to navigate all of the things that are going on, and I'm not sure if there are many people who really have a good overview of all this stuff, to be honest. So for example, right, in ISO IEC SE42, right, we'll talk about that a bit more. There's a lot of work going on, regarding, AI. But in general, right, we're not looking so much at a lot of industries that are out there, again, because simply that the people who have the niche expertise on these issues are not necessarily always in the room. There's also relevant work, for example, in SC27. So if you're more in security, or you have an interest in security, that would ring a bell for you, right? Like security and AI is obviously also a big one. So in terms of developing standards, right, like standards are nicely developed, as was mentioned, right? If you have something that you kind of know how it works, and you kind of know how it's being used and how it's integrated. Well, with AI, and by the way, right, you can see some of the issues you might face with AI. I'm not sure where that L or whatever it's supposed to be is coming from. I left it in on purpose. Right? So like, well, I don't know what happened. But it looks kind of good enough, right? But don't look at it too closely, because then you realize lots of it kind of just mess. So we have a rapid technical pace, right? Like, things are developing very, very quickly. I gave a talk on AI a bit more than a year ago now, and this was before running models locally on your laptop was as easy as it is today, due to a number of developments, right? So, and I can now run essentially the open version of GPT on my laptop. Is it as fast? No, but it still works. So rapid technical pace. However, what might be even more relevant to us in a lot of cases is the breakneck pace of expectations, right? So yes, technology advances very quickly, but what can go even faster is what people kind of wanted to do or expected to do. And that is not always kind of realistic. We have many laws, regulations, standards. We already talked about this. But the question is, especially with rapid technical pace, how do we actually keep track and actually implement this type of stuff on a technical level? Lots of open questions around that, no matter where you go, including ones that are very much of the fundamental computer science kind of variety. So, and then we have these overarching issues that I was just talking about, right? Like, if we have very large input and very large output spaces, it's a system that is hard to, for example, test or evaluate. But then we also have the specific issues that may apply, for example, to you in broadcast or in movie making or whatever else. So we have these kind of layers of complexity then that are intersecting with specific contents. And in some cases, we then get to these like unpredictable success and especially fail states. So what I'm mentioning here is something like, if you use some AI system as part of your, let's say, creative process, it might throw out a lot of trash, essentially, but it might still work in your workflow, even with that weakness, because you might be able to very quickly kind of sort out the stuff you don't need, or while something doesn't look good, it might spark your imagination or your team's imagination, and you can kind of develop further in that direction. However, right, if you are in a different context, that might be something that is not allowable, right? Because the process is different. So here we really have to think about what are we thinking about specifically, right? And how do we deal with it? So why might you have to think about AI? And this is kind of, I think, one of the last things I want to talk about. And then Rohit will go into this more, talking about kind of like AI management systems. So it is transformative to use AI, but there are a lot of weaknesses. There are a lot of issues. There are a lot of complexities. And we have to make a lot of decisions that function for us, for our context, for our organization, you name it. Right? And it has to do, first of all, with understanding what we're even dealing with. What is it? We might have to think about things like interoperability. How can we kind of plug our stuff into someone else's stuff without it falling over? If we're thinking about something like video formats, right, or encryption technologies, or digital watermarks, all this type of stuff, you genuinely require that these things work in different places. And here, it's not that different. We also then have to think about what is proper use and improper use for us, again, in our environment, in our context, and what do we do about it? And last but not least, there is this kind of very baseline question of figuring out what is and is not possible, what can and can't be expected. So we had a discussion earlier in one of the panels about like assistant directors and what role do they play? Things like that. Like, well, if you expect your AI system to do certain things that it just cannot do, well, you're kind of setting yourself up for failures. So standards really can kind of elucidate what is out there and how you can address AI challenges. But for that, again, you need to go to the drawing board, right, and figure out what is it we actually want to do and how we do it. So last fundamental slide, right? Going to the work I'm doing with NIST. So we're working on this testing, evaluation, verification, validation project right now. So, and there are a number of things we kind of want to do here, right? So if you want to evaluate or test if something works, right, like, or how it works, does it meet your requirements, whatever they may be? We have to do a few things, even if we don't know your specific context, where we need to define kind of like key terminology, get to a common understanding of how these things work. And then there are a lot of challenges for testing or evaluating something that is as complex as many AI systems are. Right? We looked at, for example, supply chains earlier today that aren't that simple to deal with. So how do we kind of figure out what we even have to evaluate for or test with, considering like our architecture and our context? How do we select the right approach and method for what we're doing? How do we align with the AI lifecycle, and where do we have to do what? Right. So a lot of what I've been talking about is not really AI related, first of all, right? It's what is our business, or what is this project, and what are our requirements for this to work? And from that, you can then build kind of technical requirements or specifications that are technical and that you can then kind of test against, let's say, with computer science methods. What are the things you have to watch out for? That is kind of what we're trying to do with this kind of NIST Zero draft, and really thinking about like how to address these specific challenges of AI. And kind of going back to what I was saying, people at NIST know about AI. We do not know about, airlines. We do not know about broadcasting. We don't know about movie making. So there is a lot that can be done, but if we get input, right, and you ask the right questions, for us to then think about for AI and maybe figure out a way in which we can fulfill your needs. If we don't hear from an industry, it's very hard for us to put anything relevant in this document, because we don't have enough context and understanding of what you and many others are doing to do that ourselves. And with that, I hope this was helpful. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back over.
Terrific. Thank you, Laurin. That was all I had hoped for, and even more. So carrying on the conversation and getting more into the standard side with some additional perspectives, our next special guest is Rohit Israni. Rohit serves as the chair of the U.S. committee. I think Insights was on one of your slides, Lawrence, responsible for participation in international AI standards at, ready for this, ISO IEC JTC1 SC42, and that's the Artificial Intelligence Standards Committee at JTC1, and acts as the liaison for SC42 with the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, so OECD, and ML Commons. He's also the founder and CEO of Sentient AI. Rohit, the podium is all yours.
Thank you, Andy. And Laurin did a great job setting this up for what sometimes is more of a philosophical discussion, because you get into talking about governance and policies, and a lot of it comes up as, you often see 10 rules of AI, and, various organizations like the OECD, the UN, they come up with broad guidelines around the usage of AI. But in an organizational context, how do you tie policies to your governance and basically the processes and systems of operation in your organizations? And that's where we have a class of standards called the management system standards. And many of you may be familiar with, for example, ISO 9000, which is the quality assurance standard. So it's a way of looking at quality, and it's a set of processes that companies use to manage quality. within the same class of standards is what ISO IC JTC1 SC42 contributed. It's a standard that got released last year called ISO IC 42001. So in the next 15 minutes or so, I will introduce you to the standard. How does it kind of tie together policies, governance, how you could use it in your organizations. There's a couple of companies in the media and entertainment sector that have already got certified to it. And that's what I will speak about. But the first thing is, why do you need AI assurance, right? There is a need that's coming out of regulations. You have a variety of regulations asking you to manage your risks, as organizations. B, there is the fundamental process, right, that happens when you come up, like for your organization, for your company, you're developing an AI product. You come up with an AI product, you have an AI customer, AI user. When you're working up your math of whether this makes business sense, there's a cost-benefit analysis. The AI customer is evaluating this usage of AI. What does it bring to me? What value does it add to me? As a developer of AI, you come up with a set of responsible AI guidelines for your organization. You may have heard of these terms, and Laurin alluded to them, as did Andy: fairness, transparency, safety. And then as a producer of AI, you want to demonstrate to your customers that you're embodying these principles in your development of AI. And that's where AI assurance comes in, and a standard like 42001 is your way of telling your customer that we have governance processes in place, we have AI assurance, we have been certified, and we are following a set of guidelines for ourselves to manage risks. And one more thing happens in a typical system. You have a decision based on the customer evaluating the risk, looking at your usage of AI, what they're getting out of that product. They get value out of using that product. In the case of AI, there are other stakeholders who get impacted too. And that's the place where you need to do an impact assessment. For example, let's say you're using AI. This is a use case that came up not too long ago. CVS decided to use AI in kind of preventing theft in their stores. So you would actually do facial recognition. But anytime you have facial recognition of known offenders, but anytime you have a false positive, it goes more into profiling, potentially doing profiling for a class of people. So the use of AI has an impact. The same thing, great to use AI in terms of creating movie scripts, for example. How are you thinking about copyright? And, those are how is the rest of that ecosystem impacted? And that's where in AI, there is an additional step of looking at the broader impact to other stakeholders, to the rest of society, right? And that's where impact assessment comes in. As I mentioned, a management system as a standard has been around, and it's used basically as a set of processes. Now, in a management system, you're assessing a company, whether it has the right set of processes, but it's not actually assessing a product. So you're looking at, are you planning, doing, checking, and acting? What is your broader system? And it has a set of clauses which are common for all management system standards. I mentioned ISO 9000, a quality standard, is one. Some of you may have heard of 27001, which is a security standard, also a management system standard. And so organizations use a management system standard for basically creating customer trust and sales enablement, also helping to comply with regulations where you have risks, and it forms a strong foundation of a governance, risk management, and compliance position of an organization. So let's talk about the ISO IC 42001 and how the standard helps with AI assurance. And it's not a standalone standard. As Laurin alluded to, there are several standards that SC42 has been working on that play a role to make this actually a comprehensive set of standards that you can use for management system. You need to have an understanding of your organization's AI use. A foundational model company has a different perspective on their view of risk of AI. A company that's making an M&E product using AI has a different perspective. So you need to have an understanding of your organizational AI risk. Errors, challenges, mistakes, implications of AI can have far-reaching consequences. So your board of directors, your executives, they need to be involved in creating the right policy. And we have a standard which is called the governance implications of use of AI. So it's a complementary standard. What are the roles and responsibilities of your senior executives, of the audit committee, of a board of directors? And then there's a risk management standard. Every AI application comes with a set of benefits. It also has a set of risks. What's the process for you to manage and come up with a list of risks? And there's a standard for it. The AI management system standard ties all this together. But as I mentioned, for AI, there's also a need to do impact assessment. What could happen to the rest of society by the usage of AI in this application? So we do have a standard that got released a month and a half ago called 42005, which is a system impact assessment standard. And then as an organization, based on all this coming together, there needs to be a meeting of mind between the engineers, the stakeholders, the board of directors, the executives, and you need to have a set of organizational policies around AI and your governance strategies. Who's responsible for what? And you also need to lay down within the AI supply chain. You may be creating one part of AI, but maybe relying on, for example, a foundational model company. So part of the responsibility of the AI product rests there as well. And there needs to be an appropriate understanding of who's responsible for what in the AI supply chain of your organization. And of course, market vigilance. Putting all this together, you actually create the management system for your organization. And every management system for every organization will be different. It'll have a set of controls, and for every class of verticals, it'll be different. It'll have a set of controls, approaches that, as S342 is a horizontal committee, would be applicable across the board. But both verticals and specific organizations will have their own management system standard. The other thing is this standard is certifiable. The ecosystem for certifying this got activated last year. There are 50 plus organizations that have been certified to the standard. It's very actively being, there's active work going on. Perhaps several organizations in the audience here may also be developing management systems to certify to the standard. And just a brief look at structure. This slide is an eyesore. Being a standards person, it is required for me to put a couple of eyesore slides in front of you. So this is one of two. So it does have the three areas. It's got the management clauses. It's got the Annex A controls, and it's got the Annex C. And again, as I mentioned, the management clauses are the same for other management system standards. So if you've used 27001, part of what you did for that, you could actually reuse. And this is my second eyesore slide. This is an Annex A controls. I will briefly talk about some AI specific areas. So you have policies. And I think this session has this tie-in with policies and standards and governance. So it's a requirement within the controls. There needs to be a statement of applicability. You have a list of these controls, and you identify each one of them and you document them. So there are policies, internal organizations, your resources for the AI systems. As I mentioned, assessing the impact of AI systems, you're expected to do this particularly for AI, and this is unique to AI. AI system lifecycle. And within that sits a very important body of work that Laurin talked about, which is testing, evaluation, verification, validation. And you should have records of how you did all of that. How did you think through all of that? They say data is the new oil, and for AI, it's what AI is based on. Good data in, good provenance. These are must-haves for AI. What's the source of your data? Are you recording? You have the rights to use the data. All of that needs to be in your documentation for your data. Information for third parties, like information for interested parties. You could have the government requiring perhaps some place where you're required to submit a report for applying to a federal contract. You could be having other people in the supply chain who may be asking you information. You should have that readily available. Documentation of the use of AI systems and third-party and customer relationships. Within the supply chain, what we're seeing, obviously, is the beginning has taken place. Several of the foundational model companies are certified, and then the standard propagates to the ecosystem through their supply chains. And that's how I think, this is the final slide. Thankfully, it's not a slide on controls. But why should this be relevant to this group, right? So I think AI assurance, as Andy pointed out, the importance of policy governance standards as technology changes, new risks come in, and assurance that you're managing, to those risks is something important for every segment. Transparency, accountability, these are areas. Then again, as I mentioned, the management system standard is a horizontal standard. It provides those set of controls that I described are applicable to any industry. And there's an opportunity really for a collaboration. We do have a liaison from SC42, both ways, with SMPTE, and my vice chair, who also works for Google, is the liaison. And there's an opportunity really of seeing how the standard could be used in the M&E space. There could be potentially a playbook looking at the set of controls and brainstorming on what would be really important, what are the risks that are common in this segment. There could also be a schema for a vertical that could be created. And I think this is the right time, the right place, the right organization to be having these discussions. And I'm really glad to be here and to have had the opportunity of sharing this with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rohit, and thank you, Laurin. That was really interesting. I would, when I was sitting there, I was just thinking about how we engage with ISO, and actually ISO engaged with us. Wael came to us, and he was so very much interested to get us involved in the ISO discussion because he thought you represent media. And I said, when I had the discussion about getting involved, I said, well, we need to have this seat at the table. We need to be in this ISO discussion. And then Andy really said to me, well, Thomas, we are the table. We are the table for the media industry to come together to talk about AI. And that's, I think, is at the core of this event, getting people together, talk about AI. What are the interoperability challenges, so that we can go into this ISO discussion and be part of this conversation, right? We have now time for Q&A. I can kick it off with a few questions. Rohit, 42,001. You really have two questions there. I saw 42,006. That's the certification requirements. My question is, what's there in terms of certifications? Like 9,001. You have companies who are certifying you. Is that the same approach as 42,001? And is there already something out there?
I'll speak aloud, so perhaps my voice is loud enough.
Or you can come to the podium, and I think the audio guys have to.
Loud, so as you
we don't get the time, which we really want them to do that.
All right. Yes. Yeah, come to the podium here, and then.
So the certification ecosystem, and you correctly pointed out, it's there for 9,000, and we have the same for 42,001. It got activated last year, and you have active certifications going on, the usual Big Four, several of the other firms, Shellman, Align, SGS, they're all certifying companies. As you can imagine, in this ecosystem, the first companies that have got certified are often the foundational model companies. So Anthropic was the first foundational model company that got certified. Microsoft, AWS, Google, the major cloud providers, they're certified, and it's trickling down to the ecosystem. Between 50 to 75, maybe more than that, companies have got certified to 42001. And I'm also, I was just checking yesterday to see if any media and entertainment provider has got certified, and Autodesk, I noticed, has got certified to 42001. So it's all happening right now.
Yeah, and then the other question I had for you was, how do you propagate? How do you socialize 42001? What do you do for training? Is there anything like training resources? Or, I mean, the obvious easy answer is, you obviously come to events like this and you speak about it. And but is there a way how you want to reach larger audiences?
So there are two things that we've done. We did, like, when we launched the standard, beginning with 2023, we did two things. The first thing is, as Laurin mentioned, there's the NIST AI risk management framework that was already released. So in collaborating with NIST, we did a crosswalk between 42001 and the NIST AI RMF. And we did a webinar. It's available on YouTube. If you were to Google, we did it with Insights as a committee. We also did, with an actual use case, walked, through the process of getting certified to 42001. And we did a webinar on that as well. And we've been doing these regularly. So if you look out for the INSYS channel on YouTube, you will see a series. We also did one on data. And last month we released one on impact assessment. So that's one way whereby we are getting the content, the videos out on YouTube. Of course, the standards are available for purchase, both via the ANSI website and also directly from ISO. And then I think forums like this, where we're actually having a dialogue, and where perhaps there are questions that are being asked. Again, standards are not static. New standards come out, standards get revised. So I think that dialogue is equally important, and, meetings like this certainly help. Thank you.
Thank you. Laurin, we talked a little bit in the speaker ready room, about, trust and, how this trust can be regional. And I thought that was really interesting. But I also wanted to talk to you about, what can we, contribute to NIST? How can we help you in NIST, to get the feedback you need?
So this one shows a channel, so I thought I would try this one. So I think, in terms of like what NIST, would need in terms of the zero drafts is really getting that understanding of what your needs are, what your workflows are. So, for example, like if you use, someone was mentioning, right, a AI powered camera robot that like tracks animals. I can make up some ways in which I could evaluate such a system, but then I'm not a videographer. I also don't build robots. I also don't track animals, for documentaries on a regular basis. So I would probably make something up that isn't really in line with what you need. So I think being at the table and talking about, hey, this is what we do and this is what we need, that is really relevant. Similar example, like I can't imagine how complicated it is to do broadcast of large events, like feeding into multiple places that need different formats and whatever else. But I don't actually do it. Right. So getting that insight into what is actually going on and what are your actual use cases? What are you thinking about, of, what you might be able to do or what you want to be able to do? That is really, I think, what is useful, to NIST, for the zero drafts, but probably also, like, more generally speaking, in a forum like SC42, because again, like, people who work in healthcare and who might be in the room don't know what you need because they have no idea about any of this.
Yeah, that sounds to me like the Joint Task Force for at SMPTE, similar to the AI Task Force we already have, and maybe it can be the same, but to look at exactly that. And yeah, I have another question, which I guess I can throw out to all of you, and including Andy, if you likes. So the other speaker I tried to invite, we were looking at 3 speakers. The other speaker I tried to get on board was somebody from the EU, to talk about the EU AI Act. So I wonder, and this is really kind of like where you classify different AI applications depending on what impact they have on a consumer. And that sounds like a lot of benchmarking, measurement of what an AI does and all this. How does your efforts play into that, what the EU put out there? Is there a cross-pollination? Do you talk to the EU Commission? And are they making use of 42,001? All that.
Oh yeah, sure.
I can use this. So I can go first on this one. But yes, the EU has been part of SC42. They certainly played a role in kind of 42,001, which was a standard that got released. For the AI Act, though, there are specific standards that Sense-Analec and Sen are developing. And while for what's called the Quality Management System standard that's required for high-risk systems, 42,001 is informing their approach, but they're also developing independently a standard Sense-Analec is developing. There's, of course, a lot of dialogue between the organizations, and we continue to work closely with our colleagues in the European standardization organizations. But there will be some fragmentation, and the hope is, there is, as things progress, there are ways that can be bridged. So 42,001 plus doing additional things would allow for compliance with the EU standards.
Yeah, I think what I would add from like an organizational perspective is essentially, right, you have a management system and there is this kind of flippant thing where you talk about, okay, you kind of pour in your requirements at the top, right? And then essentially the technical solutions or controls or whatever you need kind of come out at the bottom. So, a lot of kind of what, the standards are helping you with is that kind of translation process, right? Where it's like, okay, you can do X, but you cannot do Y. That's the rule. But then obviously there's a lot of questions around, okay, we're doing this thing. Is it X? Is it Y? Like, what can you do about it? So that's where a lot of the kind of standard work, comes in, right? In terms of like, how do you actually comply? How do you manage all of this as an organization?
Right, I'll put my ISO TC36 cinematography chair hat on for this one. So ISO TC36 has 30 some odd member countries, and some of them are in Europe. And while TC36 has traditionally handled things like projection standards, production file format standards, film gauge, and sound format standards, there's a recognition at TC36 that, hold on a second, this AI thing is something interesting and different. So over the summer, TC36 voted to form an AI study group. It's always a good place to start to understand the landscape. So that's an official ad hoc group within TC36. We also established a liaison relationship between TC36 and JTC1 SC42, and SC42 has a liaison assigned to TC36 as well. Step one is get informed. Now, there may be nothing to do, but then again, there may well be something to do. And I could imagine, particularly in the case of, let's say, workforce development and in terms of production, film and television and other forms of production, where in some countries that are much more labor friendly, if you will, and more spend more time considering how to keep their citizens working and are concerned about job losses. And I'm not talking about unions in this case. I'm talking about governmental regulations related to that. Well, there was a lot of discussion this morning about what happens to workforce. And for me personally, workforce development and professional development is it's kind of a personal issue for me because the things are changing. And how do you find access? How do you understand what it is you're supposed to do? What is the on-ramp for the next generation? That may be different, that may be regulated, and that may impact productions in Europe. And I can only imagine what might impact the actual exhibition there at the other end. So step one is get connected, be informed, and those are the steps that TC36 took over the last year or so to position itself to not be caught flat-footed, when the regulations happen, but to proactively understand what the environment was, the ecosystem was becoming.
Yeah, and I don't know if we actually said that. SMPTE is a liaison, a category A liaison now to ISO IEC JTC1 SC42. So we established this formal. There wasn't just like an informal discussion. We're now formal part of this. We're going to report right after MTS. There's going to be a plenary, I think it is, right? And so, one of ours will be there and report on what SMPTE is doing in AI. The thing too is, and I found that really interesting, but on my search for speakers, I went to the ITU. I contacted somebody there who is involved in WSC, the World Standards Cooperation. It's a cooperation supported by IEC, ISO, and ITU. And we were talking, and these two reports Andy mentioned came up, and just to show you that we have relevance there is they actually list among these I think 34 different standards and specifications they found in 5 different areas. They list the SMPTE standard. It's open binding IDE. I don't know if you remember, it wasn't really meant for trust and content provenance data, but it can be used for that. The question is, I think, is an audio watermark. So, but the question, yeah, the question I have for you, and maybe then we go to the audience. I know we're running out of time, but the question for you is, how does that all work together? I mean, how are you involved in WSC, right? I know you are. I don't know, is NIST participating at all? And no.
So, actually, this is a new effort which is actually bringing together. It got initiated by, I believe, the UN, in which there were standardization going on in a variety of standards bodies in AI. So I think the first meeting was held by ITU, I believe, in India. And now the second kind of world standards on AI is being held in Korea. Is this what you're referring to, Thomas?
Yeah.
Korea. So yeah, ISO IC certainly is hosting this in Korea, and ANSI will be sending a delegation to it. And there's also an ISO AI capacity building workshop that's going to be held on the sidelines of this event in Korea. So there is certainly an engagement from all the national bodies in this effort. And I think the goal is the right thing to do, which is create harmonization between all the various efforts in standardization that are taking place in various international organizations.
Yeah, and it's this EU effort is that's good, AI for good, right? That's what you mentioned, right?
The EU also is participating in the World Standards Congress. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to drive the SMPTE case again, when I talked to this ITU person, they're running a strategic group looking at the standards landscape, and they were really interested for SMPTE to join. I think they all are really excited to have media and entertainment at the table, and I think these are opportunities we have to pursue. I don't know, Andy, as a co-conspirator, you have any questions you want to ask the panelists, or should we just go to the audience and ask the audience?
Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions in the room? Oh, in the back there, if we can get a microphone there. Can anybody give him a microphone?
Who's that?
Yeah, or come up here and use this microphone. It seems to be popular.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for your time and coming over. Y'all have talked a lot about what the government is doing and how y'all are trying to do initiatives to get the stakeholders in a room to have discussions about what's going on with AI and the transformation that's going to have in the future. One of my two questions, and I might ask both back to back, and then you can address them both. One, what are y'all doing about universal basic income? Because that is going to be something that's going to be a major factor with this change in AI. Because if AI takes away all the tech jobs or dramatically diminishes them, most of the people that, I mean, not to be offensive to the people here, but tech jobs are going to go. Like, I'm studying editing right now. And we talk about the assistant editor job. And we talk about importing footage, transcoding, syncing, and all that stuff. AI can do all of that now, especially through timecode, which is what SMPTE was kind of known for. So with those jobs going away and the younger people not being able to come into the workforce now because ChatGPT and all these other things can do what you can do in that first 5 years of your career, UBI is going to have to be a factor that the government, I mean, that's not any of these people's jobs. This is bigger than any one of us. The government has to step in and all the world has to step in and fix this for the citizens. And then the second part of my question is, even though you're verifying all these companies now, we have companies like OpenAI who just got sued because this one kid was 16 years old on ChatGPT talking about committing suicide, and the model was basically enabling him to come up with ideas. And he eventually committed suicide, and OpenAI got sued. And this is kind of what I was asking AMD about earlier today. The drift situation is real. Drift happens in the humans just like it happens in AI. So even if you verify a company now with things that you're not even probably taking into consideration, like theory of mind and the worldview, how are you adapting these verifications to make sure a year from now or 2 years from now, if you're too busy doing something else, that these companies are still in alignment?
I'm happy to take this one.
All right.
There's only 1 minute and 43 seconds left in the session. All right. First of all, thank you for the questions and also for your comments. To the extent, universal basic income, when and if there's a policy, there might be standards related to that. I'm not sure how that would connect to media and entertainment, standards in SMPTE's domain. So really hard to comment about that at this point. To your point about on-ramps and workforce development, personally, I think that's an industry thing, that we as an industry and the organizations that lead the industry, collectively lead the industry or collaboratively lead the industry, I think they all need to be in the room. And I know there's some discussions going on about how you do professional development for existing professionals to transition as these new jobs either come up or the old jobs go away. I mean, that's creative destruction, right? That's all part of innovation. We've been dealing with that since day one. I mean, there are not a lot of bicyclists that bring film reels from theater to theater anymore, and there are no projectionists turning the cranks anymore. Actually, I put my grandfather and two of my uncles out of a job, when platters came in. So I can appreciate that. And then in terms of the safety and certification, so California just passed its first regulations. I mentioned that earlier. One of them is basically chatbot safety. All right, and that is because of change in policy in the U.S. or an unstated new policy situation. The states are beginning to come up with this. Now, I could imagine a world where California would reference management standards in 42001 and require that by statute, that companies have to certify that. Now, as Rohit mentioned, OpenAI, I guess, has certified for that, but Anthropic has. Okay. So there's work to do there. And the question is whether that'll be regulated or not, and that's up to your elected representatives.
All right. Thank you for that. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I think we could have talked about this for another hour, but maybe it comes up in the unconferencing session again.